The document arrived on Ambassador Cale Sorvith's desk at 300 station time, which should have been his first warning. Not because of the hour. Bureaucratic transmissions ignored chronology, but because the document was already 3 days old when it reached him, and 3 days was exactly the amount of time the Conclave's routing system needed to quietly reclassify something as administrative rather than urgent. Someone with significant authority had decided this particular message should feel routine by the time anyone important read it. The message was 4 sentences long. Earth has acknowledged receipt of Disarmament Resolution 7 Gamma. Earth has expressed gratitude for the Conclave's patience and attention to galactic stability. Earth will comply fully and immediately. Earth requests that the Conclave's inspection team arrive no earlier than 30 days from the date of this transmission. Sorvith read it twice. Then he read it a third time slowly, the way you read something that keeps meaning the same thing despite your certainty that it must mean something else. Earth was complying. Immediately. Fully. He sat in the blue-gray dark of his quarters for a long moment, listening to the pressure hum of the station's atmosphere exchangers. Then he reached for his secondary terminal and pulled up the file he'd spent 19 months building. The intelligence summary on human military psychology, culture, negotiation history, and behavioral response to perceived existential pressure. He found the section he was looking for in under a minute. Humans do not comply immediately with existential demands. The pattern across 11 documented contact scenarios and 4 internal military conflicts spanning 2 centuries is consistent. When humans perceive a threat as existential to their sovereignty or identity, they delay, obfuscate, negotiate, and ultimately resist. Immediate and total compliance in such scenarios has not been observed. It should be treated as a significant behavioral anomaly if encountered. Sorvith closed the file. He did not go back to sleep. The Conclave of Aligned Species had spent 22 months constructing Resolution 7 Gamma, and they had done it carefully, methodically, and with what Sorvith privately believed was an almost touching confidence in their own logic. The argument was simple. Humanity was dangerous. Not because humans were aggressive by galactic standards. They weren't, particularly, compared to the Vreth Collective or the territorial expansionism of the Shoal mind in the outer systems. Humans were dangerous because their weapons philosophy was fundamentally irrational. Every other species in the Conclave built weapons to win specific conflicts. Humans built weapons to prevent conflicts that hadn't happened yet, and the scale of deterrence they considered necessary was, by any reasonable metric, insane. A single human naval vessel carried enough destructive payload to render a mid-sized moon geologically unstable for 600 years. Not because they intended to do it, not because any tactical doctrine required it, because somewhere in the accumulated institutional memory of human military planning, someone had decided that the possibility of doing it was worth more than the certainty of never needing to. The Conclave had looked at this philosophy and reached what seemed to them an obvious conclusion. The humans were one miscommunication, one equipment malfunction, one psychologically unstable officer away from an accident that would kill billions. They weren't wrong about the potential. What they were wrong about, what Sorvith was beginning to understand they were catastrophically wrong about, was what the weapons meant. To the Conclave, weapons were tools, quantifiable, deployable, removable. He pulled up the inspection team's preliminary manifest as the station's artificial dawn began cycling through the observation ports, turning the black of space a deep and unconvincing amber. The team was already assembled. 47 specialists, including 3 xenopsychologists who had published extensively on human behavioral modeling. They would arrive at Earth's primary orbital platform in 29 days. They were, Sorvith thought, entirely unprepared for whatever was waiting for them. He just didn't know yet what that was. His first call of the morning was to Dr. Myrna Vasht, who was the closest thing the Conclave's diplomatic corps had to a genuine expert on humanity, and who had made a career out of telling powerful people things they didn't want to hear. "You've seen the response," he said without greeting. 3 days ago, she said. Her image on the terminal showed her at her own desk, already dressed, a cup of something steaming at her elbow. She looked like she hadn't slept either, I've been waiting to see if anyone else was going to notice what it means. Walk me through your read. My read is that Earth didn't just accept the resolution. She paused, and the pause itself carried weight. They were prepared for it. The response was too clean, too immediate, too carefully worded. This wasn't a government in crisis mode scrambling to respond to pressure. This was a government that had a drawer somewhere with that exact response already written, waiting for us to make exactly this move. Sorvith felt something settle in his chest. Not fear exactly, the precursor to it. You think they anticipated 7 Gamma. I think they anticipated something like 7 Gamma for years. I think the 30-day request isn't a buffer to prepare for disarmament. She looked at him steadily through the terminal. I think it's a buffer to prepare for our arrival. Those aren't the same thing. No, she said, they're very much not. He looked at the message again. 4 sentences. Earth will comply fully and immediately. What aren't we seeing? That, she said, is the question I'm genuinely frightened to answer. The inspection team arrived at Earth Orbital Platform 7 on the 29th day at 1400 hours local station time, which was exactly when the human government had requested. And this, too, was a small and unsettling detail that Sorvith filed away without knowing quite what to do with. He had requested to be part of the team personally. The request had been approved with unusual speed. The platform was vast and human in a way that Sorvith had read about but not quite internalized. Everything slightly oversized, slightly louder than necessary, built with a kind of structural redundancy that other species found philosophically excessive. Every critical system had 3 backups. The corridors were wide enough to function as emergency evacuation routes even when fully staffed. There were emergency sealing mechanisms on every 4th panel of every corridor, placed at intervals precisely calculated. He knew this because he'd read the engineering documentation to ensure that no point on the platform was more than 12 seconds from a pressure seal. Humans built everything as though they expected it to fail. The lead human representative waiting for them at the docking terminal was a woman named Director Amara Osa. She was 43 years old, according to her biographical file. She had spent 11 years managing Earth's strategic deterrence infrastructure before her appointment to what the humans called the Office of Galactic Compliance, a department, Sorvith noted, that had not existed 8 months ago. She smiled at them. The smile reached her eyes. This was, he had learned, genuinely difficult for humans to manufacture under stress, which meant either she was a skilled enough deceiver to fake the reflex, or she was actually not under stress. He wasn't sure which interpretation was more concerning. Ambassador Sorvith, she said, extending her hand in the human contact greeting. Welcome to Earth space. We've been looking forward to this. Looking forward to it. He filed that too. He shook her hand because he had read enough about human social dynamics to understand that refusing the gesture would register as a calculated insult, and he wasn't ready to signal that he'd noticed something wrong. Not yet. Director Osai, he said, thank you for facilitating this visit. Of course. She gestured toward the corridor behind her. We've prepared full access for your team. Every facility you've listed in the inspection parameters, plus several we thought you might want to see that weren't on the original list. He caught Vasht's eyes briefly. Facilities we didn't ask for. That's very thorough, he said. We want this process to go smoothly, she said, and there was something in her voice when she said it, not dishonesty exactly, but a kind of precision in the phrasing that he could not immediately decode. We want this process, not we want to comply. Not we want to satisfy the conclave. The process itself was the thing she valued. He followed her down the corridor and told himself he was overthinking it. He would spend the next 16 days discovering that he hadn't been thinking nearly hard enough. The weapons were real. That was the first thing the inspection team confirmed, and it was also, in retrospect, the first piece of information that led them entirely in the wrong direction. The human government opened 17 primary military storage facilities in the first 4 days. The contents matched the intelligence estimates almost exactly. Warheads, delivery systems, energy weapon platforms, the terrifying redundant kill chain architectures that had given Conclave analysts nightmares for a decade. It was all there, all real, all, the humans assured them with cheerful cooperation, available for decommissioning on whatever schedule the conclave found acceptable. The team's xenopsychologist specialist, a quiet, thorough academic named Lan Dorvith, sent Sorvith a note on day 5 that read simply, "Humans cooperating perfectly. Recommend elevated concern." Sorvith agreed. He sent back, "Observed anything specific?" The response took 2 hours. "The humans are explaining everything we ask about. They are not explaining anything we don't ask about. This is not the same as transparency." That night he found Director Osa in the platform's observation lounge, a room clearly designed for the psychological comfort of beings who found open space calming, which meant it had been designed by humans for aliens. Another small detail. She was sitting with a cup of coffee, looking at Earth rotating below them, and she looked genuinely peaceful. "You're bothered by how well this is going," she said before he'd spoken. He sat down across from her. "Should I be?" She seemed to consider the question seriously. "Honestly, I'd be bothered too if I were you." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately classify, "but not for the reasons you think." "Tell me what I think." "You think we have a hidden weapons cache, or a redundant production facility, or some diplomatic trick where we comply with the letter of the resolution while violating its spirit." She set down her cup. Classic deterrent state behavior under disarmament pressure. "Your intelligence models almost certainly flagged all of those possibilities." "They did. None of them are what's happening." "Then what is?" She was quiet for a moment. The Earth turned below them, impossibly patient. "Ambassador, can I ask you something? When the Conclave drafted Resolution 7 Gamma, what did you believe you were asking us to give up?" He answered honestly. "Your capacity for catastrophic violence." She nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something. "That's what I thought you thought." She picked up her cup again. "Get some sleep, Ambassador. The tour of Facility 12 is at 800. She left him there, and he sat looking at the Earth for a long time, turning over what she hadn't said. "That's what I thought you thought." As though the Conclave had misidentified the object of their concern entirely. Facility 12 was not on the original inspection list. It was also not a weapons facility. It was a campus spread across 47 square kilometers in what the humans called the high desert of the North American interior, and it consisted of dozens of interconnected structures, some underground, some above, all of them connected by both physical corridors and what appeared to be a sophisticated hardened communications network. The structures themselves were unremarkable. The people inside them were not. There were approximately 12,000 humans working at Facility 12. Sorvith's team was permitted to walk freely through almost all of it. They were shown laboratories, simulation environments, what the humans called scenario planning centers, and enormous rooms filled with what appeared to be historical archives, physical archives, actual paper documents in some cases, alongside every form of digital storage the humans had developed across 2 centuries. "What is this facility's purpose?" The team's lead analyst asked the human guide assigned to them. "Strategic continuity research," the guide said pleasantly. "Can you define that?" "Sure. We study what happens to a civilization after catastrophic disruption. What systems survive? What systems need to be rebuilt? What knowledge is most critical to preserve? How long recovery takes under different scenarios." She said all of this in the same tone one might use to explain an accounting department. Lan Dorvith stood very still beside Sorvith. After the guide had moved ahead to demonstrate a simulation interface, Dorvith said quietly in Sorvith's ear, "There are 47 facilities like this one. I found the reference in a procurement document we were given access to on day 2. I didn't understand what I was looking at until now." Sorvith looked at him. 47, Dorvith said again. "Staffed, active, funded at levels comparable to their primary military research budget. After catastrophic disruption." "They're not planning to prevent a catastrophe," Sorvith said slowly. "No," Dorvith said, "I don't think they are." He called Vash that evening. She was on a different part of the platform, reviewing the decommissioning schedule with the technical team, and she looked tired and sharp simultaneously in the way that meant her mind was moving very fast. "I need you to look at something," he said, and sent her the procurement document Dorvith had found. She was quiet for almost 4 minutes. He waited. "Amara," she said finally. "Sorry. Her name, Director Osai." Vash looked up from whatever she was reading. "I looked up her background properly today, not just the biographical summary. She didn't come from strategic deterrence infrastructure. A pause. She came from continuity planning. Specifically, she spent 7 years managing something humans call the Successor Archive Project, which is a project dedicated to ensuring that, if human civilization were reduced to, and I'm quoting their documentation here, any surviving population above functional tribal threshold, enough knowledge, institutional structure, biological diversity, and technological foundation would exist to reconstitute a technologically capable civilization within 3 to 5 generations. The room felt very quiet. They've been planning for their own extinction, Sorvith said. Not their extinction. Their interruption, Vashti shook her head slightly. There's a difference, and I think it's a difference that matters enormously. They don't expect to stop existing. They expect to continue. She looked at him. Whatever we do to them. He requested a formal meeting with Director Osai the following morning. She arrived precisely on time, accepted coffee from the service unit, and sat across from him with that same expression of careful, genuine attention that he had been trying to decode since he'd met her. The continuity infrastructure, he said. I'd like to talk about it. I expected you would, she said. Why were those facilities included in our access if they're not part of the weapons decommissioning? Because they're relevant to the intent of Resolution 7 Gamma, she said. The resolution is about preventing humanity from threatening galactic stability through violence. I think it's important for you to understand the full picture of how humanity relates to violence, not just the weapons, the philosophy behind them. And the philosophy is, she turned her coffee cup in her hands. It was a very human gesture, something to do with the hands when the mind was deciding how much to say. Ambassador, how does the Conclave understand deterrence? As a threat, he said. A credible threat of harm maintained to prevent a conflict neither side wants. Yes, that's the rational actor model, she nodded. It's also, with respect, incomplete when applied to humanity. She looked at him. A deterrent only functions if the party being deterred believes 2 things, that you can carry out the threat and that you will. Most species, when under sufficient pressure, eventually conclude that they cannot afford the cost of carrying out a deterrent, that no goal is worth a truly catastrophic response. The threat becomes a bluff, and eventually every sufficiently rational adversary calls the bluff. Humans believe they would actually carry out their threats, Sorvith said. Humans believe that whether or not they carry out the threat is irrelevant, she said quietly, because the civilization continues regardless. You cannot deter a civilization that has already planned for its own worst-case scenario and concluded that it survives. He sat with that for a moment. The weapons, he said, are a deterrent, she agreed. We'll decommission them exactly as agreed, everyone. But, she looked at him steadily, but the deterrent was never primarily the weapons, ambassador. The weapons were the visible component, the component that looked like what you expected a deterrent to look like. A pause. You've been for approximately 60 years primarily deterred by our own continuity architecture, by the fact that we have made ourselves genuinely, structurally unkillable as a civilization, and we have made sure that anyone paying attention knows it. He felt the shape of it assembling in his mind, piece by piece, each piece making the picture simultaneously clearer and more unsettling. You showed us the weapons. Yes. You wanted us to focus on the weapons. She didn't answer that directly. She said, we complied with the resolution completely and immediately because the resolution was never a threat to our actual security architecture. It was a threat to the architecture that looked like security, which we were willing to surrender. She set down her cup. We wanted the Conclave to be satisfied. We wanted this process to go smoothly. We genuinely mean no harm to any member species and never have. But you also wanted us to see the facilities. Yes. Why? The silence stretched for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Because, she said, I think it matters that you understand what you did and didn't accomplish, not as a threat, as information. She met his eyes. The Conclave spent 2 years building a resolution to remove humanity's deterrent capability, and you've done it. The weapons will be gone within 18 months. That is real, that is complete, and we have no intention of reversing it. She paused. But we thought you should know, before you report back to the Conclave, that the problem is solved, that we were never primarily protected by the weapons. What were you protected by? The fact, she said, that we looked at our worst-case scenarios and decided to survive them instead of prevent them. A breath. Other species build deterrents because they want to avoid a catastrophic conflict. We built ours because we looked at history, our own history, 5,000 years of it, and decided that catastrophic conflicts are sometimes unavoidable. So we built for the after. He filed a full report to the conclave that night. He included everything: the facilities, the conversation, the procurement documents, Dwarvith's analysis, Vasht's research on Osai's background. He organized it carefully and without editorializing, because the facts were sufficiently alarming without emphasis. The conclave's response arrived in 36 hours, which was unusually fast. It said, essentially, that the report was noted, that the decommissioning should proceed as planned, and that the conclave would review the continuity infrastructure question in a future session. Sorvith read the response 3 times. Then he went and found Vasht. She was in the archive section of the inspection team's workspace, surrounded by documents she'd printed physically, because she found it easier to think with paper in her hands. She looked up when he came in and read something in his face. "They're going to call it a success," she said. "Yes. They're going to report to the member species that Earth has been disarmed and the risk is resolved." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Are they wrong?" He thought about it carefully. "The weapons are being decommissioned. That's real. The visible deterrent is being removed." The conclave's concern was genuinely about a military accident, a miscommunication, a weapons malfunction. Then yes, the risk is genuinely reduced. But if the concern was about whether humanity could be compelled, whether the application of sufficient galactic pressure could change what humans are willing to do or willing to endure, he stopped. Vasht finished it. "Then we've learned exactly the opposite of what we hoped." He nodded. And there it was, the full shape of it, assembled at last. The conclave had spent 22 months building a resolution designed to demonstrate that humanity operated within the same rational actor framework as every other species, that the right pressure, applied through the right channels, could reshape human behavior to fit galactic norms. And Earth had complied, immediately, fully, with a smile that reached its eyes. And in complying had demonstrated something that no amount of resistance could have shown more clearly, that the weapons weren't what humanity was protecting, that the thing humanity was protecting, the actual object of their strategic philosophy, was something the conclave had never identified, never targeted, and could not reach with any resolution. He found Amara Osai on the observation deck again on his last night aboard the platform. She was looking at Earth. She always seemed to be looking at Earth. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." The 30-day buffer before our arrival, he looked at her. "What did you spend it doing?" She smiled, and this time he recognized the smile. Not warmth exactly, or not only warmth, satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for exactly this question. "Finishing the 48th facility," she said. He looked at her. "And the 49th, she added. The construction program accelerated significantly when the resolution passed. We prioritized the most vulnerable knowledge categories: ecological restoration science, genetic diversity archives, foundational manufacturing capability, theoretical physics at the pre-specialization level." She paused. "Things that are easy to lose and very slow to rediscover." "You used our pressure," he said. "We used the clarity," she corrected gently. "You showed us a timeline." 18 months of decommissioning, followed by conclave verification, followed by whatever comes next. It was useful to know the timeline. It helped us prioritize. She looked back at the Earth. "We're not adversaries, Ambassador. We genuinely aren't. We want exactly what you want: a stable galaxy, minimal violent conflict, functional relationships between species. We are completely sincere about that. And yet we will also," she said simply, "be here after anything you can do to us. Not because we're stronger, we're not. Not because we're better, we're not that either." She was quiet for a moment. "Because a very long time ago we learned something that I think your species may not have had the particular misfortune of learning." "Which is?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. "That civilization's end," she said finally. "It's not a possibility or a risk or a scenario to be managed. It's a thing that happens, like weather. Ours ended in pieces more than once, and we rebuilt, every time. And somewhere in the process of rebuilding, we stopped being afraid of the ending." She turned to look at him, and what he saw in her face was not arrogance, not aggression, not the cold calculation of a strategist who had outmaneuvered him. It was something much more difficult to respond to. It was patience. Absolute, unconditional geological patience. The patience of something that has already survived so many things that survival itself has become a baseline assumption rather than a goal. "You're not afraid of us," he said. "No. You're not afraid of the conclave. No. Is there anything," he started again. "Is there anything you're afraid of?" She looked back at Earth. "Forgetting," she said. "That's the only thing that actually concerns us, not defeat, not destruction, not loss, those we plan for." She pressed her fingers against the observation glass lightly, as though touching the planet below. "We're afraid of forgetting who we were before we knew we could survive, of losing the part that still feels afraid, still grieves, still loves things that don't last." A pause. "We build the archives for knowledge. We haven't quite figured out how to archive the rest." He stood beside her, looking at the small blue world turning patiently in the dark, and felt something shift in how he understood everything he'd seen over the past 16 days. Not the facilities, not the weapons or the decommissioning schedules or the carefully worded 4-sentence response that had started everything. The thing he'd been trying to decode since the beginning. The Conclave had looked at humanity and seen a threat to be managed. They had looked at the Conclave and seen a timeline to plan around. And somewhere in that gap, between being seen as a problem and seeing themselves as a continuity, was the thing that no resolution could touch, that no inspection could quantify, that no diplomatic pressure could reshape. His final report to the Conclave was longer than usual. He included all the technical data, the decommissioning progress, the verified facility access, the compliance metrics that would, by every quantifiable measure, allow the Conclave to report that Resolution 7 Gamma had achieved its stated objectives. He also included a section that he suspected would be reclassified as administrative before it reached anyone important, but which he wrote anyway, because he had spent 19 months building a file on human behavioral psychology, and he owed it whatever honesty he still had. The section was short. The Conclave's stated objective in Resolution 7 Gamma was to reduce the risk posed by human military capability. This objective has been achieved. The weapons are being decommissioned on schedule. Earth is in full compliance. I recommend the Conclave consider, however, whether the correct question was asked. We asked whether humanity's weapons could be removed. We did not ask whether humanity's weapons were ever the primary source of the risk we were concerned about. Having spent 16 days as a guest of the human government and its director of galactic compliance, I believe the honest answer is that they were not. The weapons were a signal, a visible, quantifiable, inspectable signal that pointed toward a philosophy of deterrence, but they were not the deterrence itself. The deterrence is the architecture of continuity. The 60 years of quietly, methodically, exhaustively planning for their own worst-case scenarios, the 49 facilities, the physical archives, the seed banks, the genetic repositories, the foundational knowledge libraries, the successor education programs, the hardened communication networks designed to function after every primary system has failed. We did not target this. We could not have targeted this. It is not a military program. It is not a weapons program. It contains nothing that any inspection regime could classify as a threat. It is simply a civilization that looked at the possibility of catastrophe and said, "We will still be here." I do not know what the appropriate policy response to this is. I am not certain there is one. What I know is this: we achieved our stated goal, and we learned in achieving it that our stated goal was not the thing we actually needed to understand. The galaxy spent 2 years trying to disarm humanity. Humanity cooperated completely. And in cooperating demonstrated quietly, patiently, without a single raised voice or weapon, that they were never armed in the way we feared. They were armed in a way we don't have a word for yet. I recommend we find one before we need it. He was halfway back to Conclave space when a final message arrived from Director Osai. No official header, no classification, just a short personal note. "Ambassador Sorvith, thank you for the visit. Your team was professional and thorough, and we hope the decommissioning process continues smoothly. I wanted to share one thing, in the interest of the transparency you deserve even when I wasn't always in a position to provide it fully. The 49th facility contains, among other things, a xenolinguistics archive. every language the Conclave has shared with us, in its complete documented form, along with every translation framework, cultural context file, and historical record we've been given access to. It also contains the beginnings of a reconstruction program, a framework for rebuilding functional diplomatic relationships from scratch, beginning with first contact protocols, in the event that a future human civilization encounters a conclave member species without any prior relationship history. We archive the weapons treaties, too, and the weapons, not the physical weapons, the technical knowledge, how to build them, not because we intend to, but because we learned a very long time ago that knowledge you choose not to use is different from knowledge you've lost. We archive everything, Ambassador. The things we're proud of and the things we aren't. The capacity for peace and the capacity for catastrophic violence, side by side in the same catalogs, because we've discovered that you can't really preserve one without being honest about the other. I hope that context is useful. Ao he read the message once, sat with it, read it again. The weapons knowledge. Archived, preserved, not deployed, not threatened, not pointed at anyone, just kept with the same meticulous care as the seed banks and the language libraries and the genetic diversity records, because humanity had decided that the choice not to use something was only meaningful if you still could. The Conclave had spent 22 months and all the diplomatic weight of 16 member species removing a deterrent, and humanity had complied, and the deterrent remained. Not in the warheads being carefully disassembled in orbital decommissioning facilities. In the knowledge of how to build them, sitting quietly in a hardened archive in the high desert, next to the xenolinguistics files and the ecological restoration manuals, and the reconstruction frameworks for civilizations interrupted by things they didn't choose and couldn't prevent. He looked out the viewport at the stars. Thousands of them, each one another system, another species, another civilization that had looked at the galaxy and decided what it was. And somewhere behind him, in a small corner of one ordinary solar system, a civilization that had ended before and rebuilt before and grieved before and continued before was filing papers and updating archives and doing the quiet, permanent, essentially unkillable work of being humanity. Not because they had won anything. Not because they were stronger than anyone. Because they had looked at everything they'd already survived and decided, without drama, without ceremony, without even very much emotion, that whatever came next they would be there for it. The stars didn't answer. They never did. But he understood for the first time why that had never stopped anyone from looking at them.